species A and species B are prey of C. Okay, so let me see if I can clear some more space on here real quick. That was very helpful. Okay, so I've got species A and species B. These are my prey. Species C is the predator here. Okay, so I've got an increase here. So my result here, I get an increase in species A, okay, which actually causes an increase in species A actually causes a decrease in species B. Because as you increase species A, that increases the number of predators of species C, right? If you just think about, if you take out species B, okay, so if we remove species B from the talk for a moment here, if you think about your typical predator-prey graph, okay, I'm going to get rid of this other stuff. I am going to make some room here. So if you think about your typical predator-prey graph, and those two organisms move up and down with one another, right? If I've got my prey population increases, then my predator population increases with it. My prey population starts to decrease now because there's too many predators. My predator population will follow that. Okay, so if I have an increase in species A, like I do here, then my predator population for species C is going to go up. Well, if species C goes up, species C, remember, my predator eats both A and B. Okay, so if there's an increase in number in predators, species B is going to go down. Okay, and that's all due to species A. So it's an indirect form of competition. Species A didn't directly decrease the population of species B, but by helping to increase the predator population, it actually did decrease population B. You can see competition happening here on this graph. You could hopefully draw some conclusions that as you look at this graph, that when these two types of paramecium are grown together, okay, when they're cultured together, you have a definite winner and losers for competition for resources. When they're grown individually, they both do pretty well. But grown together, the Aurelia is much better than the Caudatum at gathering the resources in the particular environment. Competitive exclusion can basically be a result of competition. Okay? If I have two species that are competing for the same resources, they both cannot continue that competition indefinitely. At some point, you may run into one of them being no longer able to exist. If all the rest of the ecological factors stay constant, then one of them is going to be better at this competition, and that can eventually mark the end for the other. So competitive exclusion, like I said, could be an end result of the competition that is occurring. And so one of the ways they try to prevent competitive exclusion, because evolutionary-wise, we don't want competitive exclusion. Biodiversity-wise, we don't want this. Ecosystem stability, we don't want to decrease our diversity. So one of the ways that we try to accomplish this, or that the ecosystem, the community will try to accomplish this, is through resource partitioning. Okay, and so resource partitioning is when basically these organisms that are competing against one another kind of carve out their own little space. Okay, so the organisms here, these species here, are what are called sympatric. If these species are sympatric, then basically that means they live in the same or overlapping area. So they're different species, but they live in the same area. Okay, and so they consume slightly different foods, or they may use the resources in slightly different manners. Okay, the example here, they're talking about a kind of, basically a kind of gecko. It's called an anole, a kind of lizard or gecko. That's an OLE. And so they practice this, these organisms do this resource partitioning where they consume slightly different foods. They use resources in a slightly different way. And so it allows all these different kinds of lizards to survive, and to be able to coexist and not suffer this competitive exclusion, because you've got some of them that live on the ground, some that live high up in the canopy, some that are more for the shrub area, and so this resource partitioning allows them to coexist. Another way that organisms, the community, will try to prevent this competitive exclusion is through what's called character displacement. And character displacement, I'm going to actually have to write it. So character displacement is when the sympatric species again, so they're living in the same area, and those characteristics are going to start to diverge to help make them a little bit different so that they can access different resources. The example here would be the Darwin's finches and the bird beaks. As they were all living on the same island, eventually you started to get some divergence in this beak characteristic, which allowed them to eat different types of food. So that's your character displacement. Again, both of these things help prevent competitive exclusion from happening. Okay, we've got two things left. I'm sorry, I know this has been kind of long, but they both should be a quick review, hopefully. The first one being secession. Y'all know what secession is. You know that's that changing, that transition of the community over time. So as time passes, how the community is going to change and transition. And you know it starts with those pioneer organisms. Those pioneer organisms being things like bacteria, lichen, algae, as it works its way up to the climax or stable community. So remember, you had your pioneer species down here of your lichen, algae, bacteria. Then your grasses move in, your annuals, your perennials, shrubs, the softwood trees, then the hardwood trees, till eventually you get your stable climax community. Remember, you can also have secession of a pond. You can see that increasing here. There's the pond. And as the silt and the debris start to settle at the bottom, the pond becomes shallower and shallower, and eventually it can develop into a solid, can develop into forest area, grassland area, but that pond will eventually fill in there. Also, remember, you have two kinds of secession. We have the primary secession and our secondary secession. Again, if you don't remember this from your freshman year, you're going to need to read about it in your book or come ask. But most of you guys know this so well your freshman year that I don't feel like we need to spend a lot of time on it now. So remember, primary secession begins in an area that's lifeless. So there was nothing growing there. There's nothing living there. Rocks, volcanic islands, and those pioneer species need to come in. Secondary secession, remember, occurs after some kind of disturbance. There's been a fire. There's been a natural disaster. Something has definitely torn up the community, but the soil is still intact, and you're not starting from scratch. And the last thing we need to review is our human impact. Remember, humans have a definite, very large impact on the ecosystem for a number of ways. Unfortunately, most of them are not usually good. So one of the things that we can do to the ecosystem, the communities, is we decrease diversity for a number of reasons. We may overfish something. We may overhunt something. We may destroy a habitat, and so now that organism has nowhere else to go. But we can very easily reduce diversity within the community. We may prevent sometimes a natural disturbance. Remember, those aren't always bad. Fire is meant to come through and sweep through the community so that it has a chance to rebuild. So that could be another human impact when we actually stop those natural disturbances from happening. Fossil fuels are another form of human impact. The burning of the fossil fuels, the fossil fuel combustion. If y'all remember from your freshman year, your CO2. So your fossil fuel combustion releases that extra CO2 into the atmosphere. It also releases acid into the atmosphere, which can bind with the water and form acid precipitation. Okay? Acid precipitation is going to have an impact a lot of times on your aquatic ecosystems, okay? Because it changes. So when this acid precipitation comes back down, it can change, the delta or the triangle is change. Okay? It can change soil pH. Okay? It can change the aquatic pH of a marine system because of this acid precipitation that comes from the fossil fuel burning. Okay? Also, you have the potential of the greenhouse effect. Okay? There's a lot of argument about global warming and whether it's actually happening. Okay? But your greenhouse effect is based on the fact that we're releasing all this CO2 into the atmosphere. We are increasing our CO2 concentration in the atmosphere from the fossil fuels, from the erosion, from respiration in general. And so as we increase the CO2 in the atmosphere, more as it gets trapped here in the atmosphere, it ends up trapping more of the sun's rays that would normally be able to escape and leave. They are no longer able to. Okay? And so that is the greenhouse effect, the fact that we are increasing, and that is happening. We're increasing our CO2 output and the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere, so it's causing that. And that's one of the things that is believed to be causing global warming. That increase in CO2 is trapping the sun's rays, and that's raising the Earth's temperature. Okay, so humans have a variety of ways that they can impact the community. And like I said, unfortunately, most of them are negative. Okay, so we'll be working with this, again, mostly with the math part, especially since a lot of this is review and vocabulary, okay, in class.